All right, we're going to get started. We have another great episode today with a wonderful, wonderful gentleman I'm blessed to work with each and every day at Full Sail University. His name is Mr. Randy Baker. Welcome to the show, Randy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ronald. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Oh, man, it's a pleasure to have you. So I always start the show out with an icebreaker. And so my icebreaker, usually it's because, I usually be like, hey, do you remember when we first met? But with you, I have a very special icebreaker. So I'm excited about this. Randy has an epic collection of cameras. All right. Do you remember what you blessed me with when we first started working together?
A brownie, a Kodak brownie?
No, wasn't a Kodak brownie. I don't remember that one. Wait, you gave me a couple of things. Actually, you gave me a camera, a decor camera that I can put, and it's actually up somewhere.
Oh, the little silver one. Yeah.
Yes, you gave me that, but then you also gave me a table for my theater room.
Oh,
that was made, that you created yourself. And that was just like, what? And I know there's a story behind that, but it was just, to me, it was just so mind-blowing to get that wonderful gift from you. And this was a glass table that Randy made using film reels. So tell us,
film reels.
Tell us, how did you get into that wonderful hobby?
I was lucky enough. I worked on a lot of the reality shows for antiquing. What happens when you work on a reality show? If it's a successful show, there's spin-offs like crazy. Everybody. I mean, we in the first show was American Pickers. And really not a well-known show. And, I'm known as the guy who'll come in and do pilots for shows, get the show up off the ground and working. And I can remember somebody asking me about that show after I shot it. And I said, I don't think it's going to last very long. Frank has Crohn's disease, and he doesn't travel. And those two guys argue like, husband and wife. And, it's like, and so I'm horrible at that. Every show I think is not going to do well does, runs for, American Pickers have been going on. But it was American Pickers, then a spinoff show of that called Picked Off, which was a really cool competition show that we shot in the Southeast. And then we did the world's longest yard sale show. And then I did a show called Tags the Riches, which was an estate sale show. And so early on, one of the very first producers that I worked with was from New York, and he was coming down to living here in Central Florida working on the show, but he was out in the middle of nowhere, Eustis, he's way out in the boonies. And so his kids were coming in to visit him, and he didn't have any entertainment for him. So I traded him an Xbox for a Bolex 16 millimeter and a Bulot 16 millimeter camera, which I wanted both of them. And so that was the start of it. He's now the VP of original programming for the DIY network in Knoxville. But he's the one who got me started. And then I was on these shows and I kept seeing camera after camera after camera. And we weren't allowed to buy the stuff while we were there. We had to go back, because it's not, ethically, it's not great. And so I just kept getting cameras. And then before I knew it, I had about 20 or 30. And then I thought, well, I'll start collecting specific kinds of cameras. I was really fascinated by the old 1950s plastic cameras that were multicolors. And then I got into box cameras, then I got into Kodak cameras, and all along I was still collecting, film cameras and stuff. And then I started getting all these cameras, and I would go to auctions and estate sales and stuff, and I would buy 50, 60 cameras at a time. It was just a lot of cameras. So a lot of the cameras that I had duplicates and stuff of, I had all these things, and I thought, well, this would be really cool. I can do repurposed art with this. So I'd always been fooling around with little robots and stuff, building robots out of parts and pieces and stuff. So I started doing that. And then, I did a couple shows and the art shows, and they went really well. I sold out in 2 days. We'd book the galleries for a week, and I'd sell out in 2 days. And they'd go, okay, bring some more stuff in. I was like, I spent 6 months working on those 35 things right there.
Wow.
So And people, I had, interior designers coming to me and saying, hey, I've got a client who wants to do a film theme in their, office. Could you help us out with that? And then,
Mhm.
people started knowing that I collected cameras, and they started giving me cameras. And then I had collectors
Wow.
around the world. Actually, I got a guy in Japan and a guy in Canada and a guy in England. And, and they know that I'm looking for specific cameras. I'm at a
Mhm.
point right now where there are only, about 225 cameras that I don't have in my collection that I really want.
Wow.
So I'm
Wow.
what's called a completionist. In the collector's world, a completionist is somebody who tries to get every camera of every manufacturer.
Wow.
I'm like about 120 cameras away from having every Kodak camera. I have some complete collections of cameras that nobody else in the world has. And so, as my wife says, it's my, that's my retirement. Actually, what she says is, when you die, I'm going to have one hell of a yard sale. So, but no, it'll
Oh
probably go to a
man.
museum. There's a couple of museums that have reached out to me that seen the collection and have reached out to me. So
Yes.
it was just one of those things where, the camera collection, especially, and I was teaching full time, and I was also supervising, producing, and directing, reality shows. So if I'm on the road in a hotel at night, it's not a whole lot to do. And so I
Right.
would be on the internet looking up, cameras that I wanted to get. And so, I'd get home and there'd be 30 or 40
They're already here.
waiting for me, from the show. And so, it just got a
Wow.
little out of control. I've really cut back a whole lot on the camera stuff. But besides
Yeah.
cameras, I also collect books on cinematography. So I have,
Oh, that's
about,
good.
I think we counted at one point. I had more books on cinematography than the Full Sail Library had books on cinematography.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah, but I've been collecting those for years. So I have a lot of
That's
antique.
amazing. I do have a question at the end, of
Sure.
course, about, some books that you would recommend, especially being an author
Oh man,
yourself. But we'll save that. We'll say that. We're gonna jump to I
I
know you're
love
gonna be
books.
ready. Yes, man. That's amazing, man. So Randy, we're gonna take it back a little bit. This is some stuff that I'm really excited about hearing about you. So what inspired you to start a career in film and television when you first
Well,
started?
um, I I grew up in a really small town in Indiana, only 1,200 people, and but we had a brand new high school. It was, if you're familiar with the movie, Blue, the basketball movie, Blue. God, what's the name of that movie? It's got Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway.
Blue Chips.
Blue, yeah,
I think it is.
yeah,
Yes,
that's
I
it.
think it's
Well,
Blue
that
Chips. Yes.
Blue Chips, that was shot in my high school gym, which was a domed high
Wow.
school
Wow.
stadium. I think it held like 15,000 people. I mean, this is the town of 12,000. We got a domed 15,000. That's how big
Wow.
basketball was. So the high school, the new high school had a film and television studio, a
Mhm.
television studio primarily. And there was a teacher there who kind of became my mentor. And so the school library happened to get a magazine called Super 8 magazine. So if you
Mm.
watch the movie, Spielberg's movie Super 8, that was kind of me growing up. I had a paper
What?
out and I bought my first Super 8 camera, and we would do movies in the neighborhood, and literally we would do army movies where we'd put like multiple
Wow.
sweatshirts on and shoot each other with BB guns and stuff. And it was hilarious and lots of fun things. But living in a small town like that, you would shoot the film and then you would send it off, and then 3 weeks later the film would come back to you and you'd splice it together on these little tape things and splice it and glue it and stuff, and then you might get like 2 or 3 projections out of it on an old Super 8 thing before it just ate your film. And it's like,
Mm.
so all my early films are gone, but
The
that
history in that, though, the history,
it was
man.
just incredible. I had so much fun, and our entire neighborhood was like a film lot. It was really
Wow.
pretty cool. And so, and then I got into high school, and we had this TV studio, and I still remember my teacher saying to me, you could do this for a living. I'm like,
Mm.
what? I grew up in a small town where everybody worked in factories or were farmers. That was it. I had no idea you could do this. He goes, yeah, you're pretty good at this. You could probably do this for a living. So when I first started out, I wanted to be a disc jockey. That's really what I wanted to be, an
Oh,
FM
wow.
disc jockey.
Okay.
But I was a boy soprano, and back in those
Mm,
days, in the 60s, every disc jockey, had a really low voice. So I used to go
mhm.
around practicing my low voice, and I worked at the local radio station when I was in high school and stuff. So, but then as soon as I started filming, it was like, forget radio. This is what I want to do. So that's what it was. And
Right.
then, I went to Ball State and then San Diego State, and
Okay.
in film and television, and
Oh,
uh,
sweet.
just got really lucky. My first job
Mhm.
was my first job out of college. I was still in college, as a matter of fact. I had one degree. I was
Mm,
working on a second degree. I had one class left, and a film crew came in town doing a documentary film for the series for PBS on Middle America. I went to school in
mhm,
Muncie, Indiana, at Ball State University, and that's where the 1950 anthropological study of Middle America came about. So they called the school and said, "Hey, do you have anybody that would be a good PA?" And I was like,
mm.
I was working for the school in the television department, and they said, "Yeah, we got this guy who's just getting ready to graduate. He's great. We'd be perfect for you guys."
Wow.
So he sent me down there, and it was a very small crew. It was only three people. It was the director was a guy named Peter Davis, who had
Mhm.
just won two Academy Awards for his documentaries, Hearts and Minds and Selling of the Pentagon. And then
Wow.
the DP was a young DP named Haskell Wexler. And then there was the AC was a guy named Paul Goldsmith. And then
Mm.
our production manager was a Kathleen, and I don't remember what her maiden name was. And she left, finished that film up, and her next film was, she was a PA on 1942 Spielberg's film. Um,
Mhm.
and then she married uh, the Kennedy, and her name now is Kathleen Kennedy. And of course, she's
Oh,
the
okay.
producer for all the Spielberg
Wow.
stuff. Yeah,
Wow.
so it was like Paul Goldsmith, who went on to become editor of Vanity Fair or Vogue, what Esquire. I went on to become
Mm.
editor of Esquire for a number of years, and then Haskell Wexler, who went on to do Thin Blue Line and became a famous director, and then Paul Goldsmith, who went on to do things like Max Headroom and all kinds of cool films in the 70s and 80s, and then Kathleen, who very small
Wow.
crew. And
Yeah.
I just had a blast. I started as a PA, and it was all shooting on Super 16, Arri SR3s. And by the end of it, I was, shooting, picking up a SR3 and shooting and stuff. And it was just on Middle America. And so I was going to be a high school teacher. That's,
Oh, wow.
radio,
Okay.
film, and television teacher. And,
Mhm.
after that job, I was like, forget teaching.
I'm sure,
Yeah,
right?
I'm working in production. And
Yeah.
I just got lucky, and I
Oh,
worked on
man.
trucks and TV stations and news stations, and then started a production company, and it just snowballed.
Wow, that's amazing. So this was pretty much after college, I'm assuming, like you just got on as many
Yeah,
productions as you
I
could.
I moved to New York. There was an up and coming network just starting. This was the beginning of cable network,
Hmm.
and so there was a music network in Canada called More Music, which was the first big music network that launched. And there was this new up and coming network, a music network that was launching in New York called MTV. And so I went to MTV and started there when they first started up, and I was there for about a year, and then moved back to Florida. And then I was here in Florida for about 10 years, working for small production companies. And then Nickelodeon was built here. And then, I knew some of the people from my early days at MTV that worked at Nickelodeon, and I ended up working there
Wow.
for 10 years. So, and in between that, I worked at a huge interactive research and design facility for Laserdisc,
Mm.
and for the world's largest publisher, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. And
Mhm.
that was a very successful, state-of-the-art facility. I mean, it's just incredible equipment. And I was an executive producer there and ran the studios. And then we got caught up into a hostile takeover tried by a British publisher named Maxwell, whose
Wow.
daughter is now in prison.
Oh, wow. Wow.
There's,
Some stories here.
Eileen, what's her name? Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend. Yeah,
Oh,
that was her dad.
yeah.
That was her
Crazy
dad.
story. Yeah.
So at the time, HBJ owned SeaWorlds and owned, they were the largest publisher. So I
Mhm.
went from being, running a large staff with a big facility to, going back to freelancing again. And then Nickelodeon
Okay.
called me and said, hey, come over here. So I went from Nickelodeon to an up and coming production company called
Mm.
Adrenaline Films, which ended up
Oh yeah.
being one of the largest production companies here in Florida. And then I got bored, sitting behind a desk running the company, and
Yeah, I can
wanted to go
imagine.
back out in the field and shoot. So yeah, it was kind
So,
of weird. I started as a kind of a producer and director, and then
mhm.
got fed up with producing and directing and went into shooting, and just loved shooting, and then worked my way back into producing and directing at the end here.
Wow. So a lot of this connecting the dots, and especially when it comes to like our students as well as, upcoming filmmakers, a lot of this sounds like being around the right people at the right time and also a lot of networking.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your
Well,
experience when it comes to that?
I'll tell you a story that is, I had some really good mentors.
Mhm.
When I was in college, my mentor was one of my high school. My mentor was my high school teacher. In college, my mentor was my high school professor, who was a visiting professor from San Francisco, a crusty old salty San Francisco filmmaker named Ricardo Diaz, who was
Mhm.
I mean, he hammered me all the time about stuff,
Ooh.
and still to this day a lot of the stuff that I use in my everyday life came from Ricardo. Like he used to say to me, you got to realize one thing: it's a business first, it's a creative outlet second. And I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, Ricardo. And then I got out of school, and I was like, holy crap! And that was I co-authored my first book. I co-authored a book through a
Mhm.
professional trade organization. That was the title of the book, called "It's a Business First." It was about running your own production company. And so Ricardo was really good. But when I started working with Peter Davis, and especially with Haskell Wexler, one of the first weeks I was on the shoot, Haskell gave me his camera case, and he said, I
Mhm.
broke the leather strap on this camera case. Can you go out and try to get this fixed? I was
Oh
like,
wow.
sure, yeah, let me take it out. And so I drove up Muncie, Indiana. Not a lot of stuff going on in Muncie, Indiana. So I drove all over the place looking for, somebody to repair this leather. And I spent like 6 hours and didn't have any luck. And I was driving back, and I remember that I had a friend who was a farmer who did leather work.
Mhm.
So I called him up and said, hey, I got this weird request for you. Can you make me a custom handle? He was like, I don't know, bring it over, let's see. And so we
Mhm.
went over and shot the bull and stuff. And he talked, and while I was there, he was crafting this handle. He made this really cool handle for the case, and I took it back. And Haskell took one look at it. He was like, holy crap. He goes, I've sent this out on the last 4 jobs I've been on. I've sent this out with 6 different people, and you're the first
Wow.
person who's ever got this fixed. So
Wow.
he goes, that says a lot about you. And so, it's
Yeah.
that kind of think outside of the box, do whatever it takes to make it work. And so for me, it was just, I had this massive love of what I was doing. I was curious.
Mhm.
I was, uh, I just really, loved everything. It was, so I was all in no matter what, so,
Yeah.
and so that took me a long way. That's, that I think is really what, people used to say to me, how come you're so busy all the time? I mean, you're
Mhm.
working constantly. It's like, I just love this stuff, and
Yeah.
and so when you love something like that and you're willing to work at it, I'm the first on the set. A good illustration of that story is somebody I worked with this guy named Randy Schaefer. We've probably done 30 television series together. I mean,
Wow.
his last
Wow.
name is Schaefer, my last name is Baker, so they don't call us Randy on the set; they call us Shafe and Bake, and so
Wow.
we're together all the time. So 2 Randys on the set. I remember hearing somebody say, I'm looking for Randy. And they said, which Randy? And they said, Randy Baker. And the person said to him, just look for the guy who's smiling the widest on the set. Because I have so much fun on, working. I
Yes.
was like, I'm
Oh,
the guy who's
man.
like, cool, let's do this. So,
Yeah.
that'll take you a long way. Having the right attitude,
Mhm.
what we do is not hard. If you're really into it, um, you know, uh, it's not that difficult, but having the right attitude and having a love for what you're doing really is
Mhm.
what sets everybody else apart from,
Yeah.
everybody else, so that's what worked for me. And
That's
I'm a
amazing.
networking kind of guy, I'm
Yes.
all
Oh,
about
yeah.
networking. So Yeah.
That's amazing. What's something you wish you would have known in your earlier career that you know now?
Everything. My
Everything.
gosh, I said so, one of the things about teaching my class is I say this to
Mhm.
students all the time. I've designed this class based on what I wish somebody would have taught me when I was first starting
Oh,
out, because it took
yes.
me 5 years to learn some of this stuff. And if somebody would
Mhm.
have just said to me up front, hey, this is how you do this, I was like, oh, ding, 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 winner, winner,
Right.
chicken dinner. I would have been off to the races right away. But it took me just trial and error and trial and error to get it right. So, it's, lighting, I wish somebody would have sat down and it took me a while to really get good at lighting. And then I went through, I taught a series of workshops around the United States on lighting, and that really helped me a lot. But, I've been doing this for over 40 years. For the last 10 years, I just feel like I've come into my, into the zone for lighting. It's taken me that long.
Mhm.
But I wish if somebody would have set me down and taught what I teach in my class right now, I would have been light years ahead of that, and so many things
Right.
that people only knew portions of, or they didn't know why we did something. They knew we did it this way, but they
Mhm.
couldn't tell me why we did it this way. So it's a big change. And so I get a lot of people going through the class that go, wow, and so I also, I still work in the industry quite a bit. And so I like to,
Mhm.
if I'm directing a show, I like to bring on really good DPs. And
Mhm.
so everybody is really curious about how do you teach digital cinematography online? That's if you're in the
Yeah.
industry, you're like, well,
Oh,
how
yeah.
does that work? I'm like, well, everybody gets an FX6, and they're like, okay. And they give it back at the end of the class. I'm like, no, 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 they get to keep it. It's their camera.
Mhm.
They come away having the gear to do their own production company. And they're like, oh
Basically.
my God, where was this when I was in school?
Right, right.
But they always ask me, okay, well, how do you teach this stuff? How do you do? And so when I start walking them through, they're like, holy crap, I need to come and take your class.
Mhm.
So it's that kind of, I wish somebody would have sat down and said, this is what, and I went to pretty good schools. And it's funny because I still have some of my own notebooks from college. And so, every now and then I'll go back through and look at them. And it's nowhere near the quality of stuff that we're teaching
Wow.
right now. Of
Yeah.
course, the internet is a big, equalizer there. There's so much information. And I still today, I say this to, one of the cool things about this industry is that I still learn something new every week, every week.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
sometimes it's mind-boggling
Mhm.
what I learned, and I'm going, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and I'm just learning this now. How did that happen? How did that?
Right, right.
Other times it's little small things. So I go, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now that that fits in this little piece of a puzzle here. So that really helps. And I'm a ferocious researcher, man. I'm
Mhm.
constantly writing. I'm constantly researching. I have probably 15 books in various
Wow.
stages on my computer, and I change my class every month. I update the class every month with new things, and so but it's a charm life.
Yeah.
When people say to me, what kind of stuff do you wear? And so I was just working on a shoot last week, and so we're sitting at lunch, and there are two good friends of mine who are also DPs that have both been in the business 30 or 40 years. And a lot of these newbies, kids that were like 20, 24 years old, sitting at this lunch table with us, eating lunch. And they started talking about stories, and they were like, oh, do you have any stories? I'm like, well, what kind of stories do you want to hear? Well, helicopter stories. Okay, well, let me tell you about, all my helicopter adventures. And then
Wow.
that led on to, all kinds of other stuff. And these kids were just like, oh my God, what a life, And it's like,
Mhm.
well, it's a charmed life. The thing about being in this business, and especially freelancing, I had my own production company, but it was, it's kind of, you're freelancing for other production companies and doing stuff. And so it's like every day you wake up and go, okay, who do I get to meet today? What do I
Right.
get to learn? Where do I get to go? What cool thing do I get to do? And all of that is an incredible education. I've traveled the world on
Oh, yeah.
somebody else's dime. I've learned, they say that if you do a documentary film, for example, it's the equivalent of getting like a master's degree in education
Wow.
on that program. So, you know, I've done documentary films on everything from double Dutch jump rope to the ancient Mayans to, homelessness and mental illness. And,
Wow.
so you just learn all this stuff, unfortunately it's I think my brain, that all that gray matter in my brain is full. But even after all this stuff, somebody's, the first thing I'll tell somebody is they're like, oh, man, you know so much stuff. And I'm like,
Yes.
I got to tell you, the only thing I know for sure is that there's a lot I don't know. That's
Yeah.
the key, is there's a lot I don't know, and I want to know that stuff. So
Right.
just not enough time in the day.
So you surely fool us, Randy, all the time, but
Again,
that's
if
what's
you
so
love it.
amazing about you.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I don't have kids, so that's the other thing.
right.
You got two small kids. I look at
Yes.
people like you and I'm like, how the heck do
Well,
they do
actually,
it?
3,
Three.
Randy.
That's right, three. I forgot.
3 now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have problems with a wife and a dog, It's like, yeah, I'm trying to keep up.
Oh man, that is super funny. So Randy, in the midst of all of this, I love the story of how your career just took off. Were there any odd jobs in that first season of your life
Oh
that you
yeah.
had to take on? Because
Oh yeah.
that's kind of the biggest thing. What type of jobs as a filmmaker should I take? I want to do more production,
Well,
but
that's really interesting because when I first moved here to Orlando, there were only two production companies in
wow,
1980. Two
wow,
production companies. That was a Digital Video and Florida Film and Tape. And there was a dub house here called Global Video. And they had this device called the Rank Cintel Flying Spot Scanner. And it was this massive $500,000 color correction system that transferred
Mhm.
35 millimeter and 16 millimeter film to videotape, and you color corrected it as you went along. So I started working the midnight shift there doing Disney
Mm,
films, transferring 35 millimeter Disney films masters to videotape for distribution. And so I got really good at color correction, and
wow.
for a while I thought I was going to move to New York and be a color corrector because and
Mhm.
then things started changing. I got a job on a new network. I and this is how things happen. So I'm working midnights there, and
Mhm.
there was a guy who came in and was doing some color correction for some film. And his company was called Florida Film and Tape. It was the oldest company in town. And we had the Disney guys in, and they had been talking about how they were starting this new network called the Disney Channel. And the very
Mm,
first show was a show called Epcot Magazine. That was back when the PM Magazine stuff was that. And they had talked about, I heard them talking about they were going to hire this local company called Florida Film and Tape to do the production of it. Well, it just so happened the next night, the guy from Florida Film Tape was in doing some color correction on a film. And so I started talking to him, and I said, "Hey, I've got a background in production because I'd come from Indiana and working on, trucks and concerts and football games and stuff like that." And I said, "If you ever need anybody, I'll come out and work for you for free." That.
wow, that's it
So
right there.
2 days later, Disney called him and said, "Hey, we got this show we want you guys to do." And he called me the next week and said, "Hey, I'm going to take you up on that. If you want to come out, I'll pay you, but you'll come out as like an A2,
Wow.
a second audio guy." And I was like, "Great." So I would work from like 8 o'clock in the morning to like 6:30 at night on the Disney Channel show at Epcot. And then I would go in at like 11:30 and then get off at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I did that for 3 months, and I
Wow.
was like,
Wow.
I was a
So
zombie. People would talk
yeah.
to me during the day, and I had no idea, but I was having so much fun. And then
Mhm.
the production company and Disney didn't get along. And so they came to me, knew I was doing color correction at this place, and they said, "We want your company to take over production." I was like, "No, these are my friends." So I went to those guys and said, "This is what's happening. You should know this. They're going to
Mhm.
dump you guys." And they were like, "Cool, we don't care. We're not really happy with them either." And it was all over little petty things, like they were not paying for AA batteries and stuff like that,
Oh,
gaffer's tape, and just stupid stuff that I looked at. So the company I was working for said, "Okay, what kind of equipment do you need? We're going to start a production company. We want you to run it, and you're going to be doing this Disney
wow.
show." So we took over as the second season. I took over as a DP on the show the second season, and it lasted 2 more seasons. And that was the beginning of doing
Wow.
production here in town. And then I just went from production company to production company to production company. Um,
Wow.
so 10 years at Nickelodeon, 4 years at HBJ, 6 years at Adrenaline, and the rest of the time it was my own company.
That's just wow, man. What would you say would be that first production that you was like, I love the pay, I love the food. I love everything about this. This is
Yeah,
what it needs to
right
be.
out of college, that documentary. I mean, this was
Hmm.
such a cool experience. All these guys came in from LA. Here I was, this little farm kid from Muncie, Indiana, good. And so they had stories, and they were all really good and really
Mm,
talented, and it was all fast paced, and it was just, you're in the middle of stuff, and it just, that just excited me. I was like, I want to do, this is what I want to do. This is
yeah.
so it really, that kind of motivated me and changed me. But working on, to be honest with you, the whole thing was, I did a lot of documentaries, I did some feature films, I did a lot of corporate videos, a lot of Department of Defense videos. So you got to think about the vertical markets out there, and that's what I find that a lot of beginning filmmakers don't really think about, all the vertical markets that are out there. And so there's education and medical and Department of Defense. The Department of Defense stuff was so much fun. I mean, you can't. I've been to almost every base in the United States. I traveled with the U.S. culinary team through Europe. I've shot M1 tanks. I've fired Russian anti-tank missiles. I've thrown grenades and stuff. So it's
Wow.
like
Wow.
all this really cool stuff, and it's like you do special forces training. You'll do biological and chemical nuclear warfare preparedness. And so it was just, I shot a catapult video for the U.S. Air Force on aircraft carriers. So when the plane takes off and the guy salutes like that, he's saluting a guy that's in a bubble on the surface of the ship. That's a catapult launcher. And so that's his salute, saying I'm ready to go. Guy hits the button and it launches the catapult. Well, they
Mm,
wanted to get a shot of the guy in the bubble and the guy in the plane. So they strapped me to the outside of the bubble onto the ship with the ratchet straps.
hmm.
I was literally
Wow.
ratchet strapped in. And they said to me, if these come loose for any reason, roll this way instead of this way, because it's a
Wow.
120-foot drop this way. You'll drop into a net 15 feet down this way.
Wow.
So
That's
it was
freaky.
just, all kinds of crazy stuff
That's
like that.
crazy.
And then when reality shows started, we thought it was going to be a gimmick. This is going to be a quick flash in the pan thing, won't last
Yeah.
forever. And the early shows like Real World and the
Hmm.
Osbournes and stuff, we were like, yeah, this is crazy stuff. And then my first real big break as a DP was on Hogan Knows Best, and
Oh
so I
yeah.
did
I remember that.
the pilot, and then 4 seasons of that, and then a season of Brooke, and then it just snowballed into every redneck show, every swamp show, every antique show, every yard show. It was very cyclical. After a while, you did all this stuff, and it was such a small industry back then that everybody knew
Oh,
each
okay.
other. So it was
Hmm.
like it was same crews over and over again, all
Gotcha.
over. You traveled to Kansas, and it would be the crew that you worked with 2 shows ago in New Hampshire.
Wow.
And so it was just a lot of fun, uh,
Yeah.
unless
That
you
was
work.
one of my questions I have for you too. Like with your list of clients, that it's just like amazing. This amazing list of clients. Like, how do you keep them calling back, and how do you get to work on all this stuff? Because that's
It's
like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just doing a good job, if you do a good
Hmm.
job. And so the entire time I was, really interested in producing my own television shows and stuff like that. And so I was writing a book probably 20 years ago called Doing TV, and was all about how
Mm,
to pitch and sell television programming. Because when I worked at Nickelodeon, I was involved in a lot of the pitch, things. And it was really
mhm.
interesting what I learned working there about how most people don't know this, but networks get pitched the same ideas over and over and over again, same
Mm,
concepts over and over. They call them
wow.
MOPs. That is called most
Gotcha.
often pitched. And so that's why most networks won't even talk to you, because that you may pitch them something that they've had 5 or 6 other people, or they're already working on a show
Oh,
like that. So that's why they make you sign the disclaimer saying that, hey, they may.
yeah.
And so and it's not uncommon for networks to still ideals. Or when I worked at Nickelodeon, before I worked there, I pitched them a show, kind of a high-tech electronic show, and they're like, nah, we're thinking about doing something like that. And then when I started working there, as a technical producer, they said, "Hey, we got this show coming in," and then when the show came in, it was an entire segment that I pitched them.
What?
Like
That's
verbatim,
crazy.
verbatim that I pitched them. So
And
that
come to
kind of
you.
stuff happens. But I went
Yeah.
and I interviewed 50 television programming executives, and then I asked them 50 questions each,
Mhm.
the same 50 questions each, and so it was a real learning experience. I got into this legal hassle with the publisher, Focal Press, who wanted to. I shot video when I did the interviews, so I
Mhm.
shot up this video, and I did a DVD of it as well. So for for the article, I was writing a book. For this book, I was writing. I just wrote the book, but I also had a DVD that I was going to market myself, and the
Mhm.
publisher didn't like that so
Yeah, like,
much. They were like, "No,
wow.
we own that. We own, you're right." And I was like, "No, no, no, that's not in the contract." So it was a big legal battle. It was a really big learning experience. I still got a lot out of it. I didn't publish the book, but I got a lot out of it. I learned a lot about television programming and how to sell programming.
Mhm.
And all the different ways of looking at selling programming that most people don't even know about. So it was
Wow.
really a good experience for me.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about that TV pitch. And I just did a episode that just released actually today about pitch decks, for films. And so that'll be cool just to hear that info from you more
Sure.
when it comes to that. So say that info for me. That
Yeah, yeah.
and you said
You
you
know,
wrote a book about it, right? You wrote a
well, yeah,
Mhm.
and so I've got a couple books out.
Mhm.
They're not, you don't make money writing books. It's like it's not. It's more of a vanity thing. It was, oh, I wrote a book, and so but for me, it was really more of just the learning experience of it.
Mhm.
Eventually, someday, I'd like to go back because it's a good idea. It's a good
Yeah.
concept to interview. That simple concept of interviewing 50 executives and asking them the same 50 questions. So that's it. So speaking of shot decks, there is a new program out there called Shot Deck. If you're not
Oh,
familiar with it, it's the
okay.
it's the largest film database of shots
Oh
on there, and
yeah.
so
I just
we're pushing the library services at Full Sail to make it part of the library services. So
that would be so amazing.
yeah, I belong to it for a year now, and it's
What?
like I do so much research. It's searchable. I think there are 34 different search. Check it out, shotdeck.com.
Yes.
There is a
Oh, yes.
student discount. It's like $30 a year or something like that. But if
Mhm.
you're doing any kind of, lookbook or anything like that, or a
Yeah.
pitch deck or anything like that, it's incredible resource. It's just like
Right.
incredible resources. If you're looking for different looks or different color schemes, it's incredible. So
Yeah.
we're still negotiating with them how we could use it in terms of education for the rights of using those, because as
Yeah.
you know, as a private school, that's one of the big things. We can't go out and, unlike a lot of the online film and television schools, those are like full-time filmmakers and filmmakers academy and stuff. Those are just individual people out there, they
Mhm.
steal that footage all the time and use it without permission. So we
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
as a private school who's accredited, we can't do that.
Yeah.
you
Can't
know
do that. Yeah.
yeah, so
No, but no, that's amazing resource. I actually discovered that. And who knows, you probably told us about this in a meeting.
yeah,
I don't know, but I was looking for a way because I'm always taking screenshots. And again, it's for that mood
yeah.
board, which when in the pitch deck. And I was like, I know they got to have screenshots. I'm usually taking them from IMDb, but I ended up coming across Shot Deck and it just blew my mind. And I did like the free trial, but I was just taking all these screenshots for like 4 films. So it'll keep me busy. But yes, it's so amazing, Randy. You're so right about that. And that'll be nice to get that,
So
for our students as well.
probably spring is where we're going to see that
Wow.
introduced. We've been working on it for a while now, and
I was
I
like, why did I not know about this before? That's how I
and,
was remembering.
and it's the same thing with Frame.io. We're
Mhm.
working with Adobe Frame.io right now. We're just starting a beta program, and we're looking at different ways to use Frame.io as in education. And so just this last weekend I gave a feedback on a feature film using Frame.io, and I would just like was
Wow.
blown away
Okay.
by how easy it was. And I got to look at all the other people's comments and stuff, and then I'd comment on their comments, and so it was pretty good.
That's amazing, man. I'm so glad to hear about that. All right, Randy. Well, this is where our interview takes a turning point. Tell us about a time you have failed and how did you overcome
Oh, I failed a lot.
it?
I teach the philosophy that if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. I tell my
Right.
students my class is really hard. It's just so much information and so much technology, and having to learn the new cameras and stuff like that. It's overwhelming for people. And I really try to get across to people, you got to give yourself permission to fail. Yoda said it best: failure the best teacher is. And there's a score of books out there written about every really famous person who's made it failed 15, 20 times before they made it. So
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been fired from jobs, and so I once you it there's an old joke about who's Randy Baker, and then when you get really good, they're like, yeah, give me somebody like Randy Baker, and then they're like, oh, get me Randy Baker, and then can't get Randy
Mm,
Baker, so get me somebody like Randy Baker, back to who's Randy Baker again. So there's that
wow.
cycle, and so it's the same thing as you get as I grew and got more confident at what I was doing. I developed this thing called a 3 red flag rule. And so I would ask questions, because you can there, this business is, there's that great Hunter Thompson, quote about, what the business is filled with, about the type of people that the business is filled with. Um, but there are some really slimy production companies out there that, you can't trust. And so you have to be really careful about that. So I developed a list of questions I'd ask production companies when they call me to hire me. And so I had a 3 red flag rule, no per diem, red flag, no travel expense, red flag, putting me up in like a podunk little hotel instead of even like a Holiday Inn, red flag. So
I
all those
love
things
it.
are red flags. And so if it got to 3 red flags, I would just say, I'm stopping you right there. No, like, I'm not going to take the job. And they were like, what? And so usually they're taken
Wow.
aback. Not many people say to them, wait, stop, I don't want to do this job. And they were like, well, why? And I was like, I got this 3 red flag rule, and you just put 3 red flags. And they're like, what? And so I explained
I'm
the 3
taking
red
it. I'm
flags.
taking that. I'm so
and then
taking
and then
that.
without fail, they would say, oh, no, well, those things can be negotiated. And so what I learned is when I started turning down jobs, I started, the rate started going up. I remember one time there was a guy who tried to hire me for this job in Bahamas, and I was just like, it's going to be such a pain in the butt to do this job. And I kept saying, no, I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. How much is it going to take? And I think I got him up to like $1,500 a day. And then I was
Wow.
like, I got to do this job. I just,
Wow.
it was still a nightmare, but at fifteen hundred
Yeah.
dollars a day, I could kind of handle that. But I have, you got to have kind of strong morals.
Mhm.
To me, if you're not, this is not a hard industry. It's not hard to do things. And I've gone through the cycle of, working on commercial productions, high-end commercial productions, where you work 8-hour days. That's it. You work 8-hour days, and anything over 8 is a time and a half and stuff, which
Mhm.
they rarely did. And then we got into like corporate videos, which were, 8-hour days again, and they paid really well and they were really appreciated. And then we got into reality television, and they were like 10 hours, and oh yeah, we're only going to give you a half an hour lunch. And then there were lots of
Mhm.
companies that started going through a phase where it was like, no, we're going to do 12-hour days. And I was like, yeah, I don't
Wow.
do 12 hours days, because when you
Mhm.
do that, you do 12 hours. By the time you get home, take a shower, eat dinner, especially if you're on the road, all you really want to do is relax and go to sleep, and then you wake up the next morning and start over again. And when you're on a 3 or 4 month show, that gets old really, really fast, and you get burned
Yeah.
out. There's a point of, you don't get the crew's not that great. And so I just said, no 12-hour days. 10-hour days are pushing it for me. And when I'm directing and producing, I may, if we need to go over one day, to go 10, 12 hours, and I ask my crew to stay and do that, they'll do that, because if we're shooting other days and we're done early, I don't make them stay. I've been on shoots where,
Mhm.
we've been done after 8 hours, and the production manager say, nope, I'm paying you for 10 hours. You guys are going to sit here for 10 hours. I'm like,
Wow.
we
That's
call
crazy.
those kayatas. Do you know what that is?
Wow. Oh no. What is a kai? What is that?
Know it all dumbass.
Wow.
Yeah. No, no, Kayada, and so,
Wow.
you just this industry can be a lot of fun, but it can also be hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot of people don't realize, they go, oh, it must be really fun to be out on the road all the time. Yeah, it is, but when you're out on the road for 8 or 9 months out of the year, and you do that for 30 years, that gets a little load. They're
Right.
like, oh, you got to go to Seattle. What was that like? Well, the airport was really nice, and my hotel was really nice, and then the airport coming out was really nice. So that was it. But it's one of those things. Like I said, it's what keeps you going is that you're learning something new. You're getting to do
Yeah.
really cool stuff. You're traveling, and the people that you work with are really incredible. I mean, it ranges. Like I just did an interview with Brian Johnson, who was the lead singer from AC/DC. And I went to
Mhm.
Sarasota, one man band, just me. And so I spent the day with him and his wife in his house doing interviews. It was just
Wow.
magical. And then 2 weeks later, I did the first African American commander of an aircraft carrier, the USS
Mhm.
Midway. The guy was like 92 years old. He was the
Wow.
guy that when they were evacuating Saigon, they packed everybody up on the ship and they were sailing away. And a South Korean lieutenant had taken a Cessna plane and loaded his family and his wife and 3 kids in it, and they were just getting out of there. They didn't know where they were going. They saw the aircraft carrier and they were like, we're about out of fuel. My wife and kids can't swim. And so this commander ordered his men to push off almost 11 helicopters off the side of the aircraft carrier so they could land that Cessna on the
Wow.
flight deck. So you meet those types of people and you get to talk
That's
to them, you get
amazing.
to relive that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
it's just incredible stuff, really incredible stuff. You get to you learn so much about business. I've interviewed almost every major CEO. I did a video for the Daytona Speedway. Well, I went to every racetrack in the United States and interviewed every major race driver. I did a show called NASCAR, or wasn't called NASCAR. It was a racing show. They couldn't call it NASCAR because NASCAR wanted too much money for the title.
Oh.
But we got to interview all these legends of racing, and so it just goes on and on and on. I mean, it's rock stars and movie stars, and just every day is something new.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. What are some key elements you think every filmmaker should have when they come on set?
Well, that's if you're beginning out, here's something that most people don't know. If you're just starting out and you haven't been around a set a lot and you're starting as like a PA or something like that, there's a great free book that you can get online called the Filmmaker's Pocket, the Production Assistance Pocket Guide, and it's free. You can find there. Yeah, I mean, you could find paid copies of it. You can order a copy of it. It's about 36 pages and it goes through everything that you need to know. Things like, I was always taught if you're on time, you're late. You got to be there 10 minutes early. And so my dad was a pretty smart guy, used to say to me all the time, if you want to be successful, just make yourself useful. If
Mm.
you're no matter what you do. And that's what I say to people who are coming on the set. If you want to be successful, make yourself useful. When I started out, it was a kind of a weird time because I was like, by the time I graduated from high school, I'd done 16 films, including a 94-minute James Bond,
Wow.
when I, in high school, in Super 8
That's
film.
crazy. That's
And
crazy.
so I thought I was really pretty good until I got to college and realized I sucked. And but I when I got out of college, people would say to me, well, what are you good at? I'm like, I do a little bit I shoot, I edit, I write, I can direct and produce. I am kind of a Renaissance video person. And they were like, no, what are you good at? And I'm like, I'm pretty good at all that stuff. Well, what are you?
Right.
And so they tended to pigeonhole you. And so I went through things where I was an audio guy for a while, and then a colorist for a while, and then like I said, a producer and director. I went right into producing and directing, and then got burned out on that. I went into cinematography, and then went back, back and forth. And so you know, it's, you have to know how to do everything. If you look at ads, if you just go to Mandy's or Production Hub or something like that and start looking at ads of what people are looking, who they're looking to hire, what type of people. There's a running joke that we had for a while. There was a great, in the Village Voice ran a thing for an editor, and it said must know how to write, shoot, edit, produce, do graphics, do audio, and they were looking for an editor. So they wanted to do all that stuff. Well, that's what most corporations and, you know, a lot of, you know, ad agencies and stuff for. They want somebody who can be a utility player, who can do a little bit of everything. And so you got to know how to tell a visual story. That it all starts with the basics. You got to know how to tell a visual story. And so we always say that we teach craft. We don't, you know, for me, a camera is just a box with a hole in it. Doesn't matter what the camera is. You know, Ansel Adams' famous quote is, the most important component on a camera is 12 inches behind it, you know. So you have to kind of think about it that way. So it's the craft, it's understanding the craft of telling a visual storyteller. It's tell a visual story, and it's a craft. It's you know, there's a lot to know. And so that's what we find, especially in a program like ours, where people come in and go, digital cinematography, this sounds like fun. And they you know, they get into our classes, they're like, holy crap, this is a lot more intense than
Right.
I thought, you know.
Right.
There's a lot more to this. And so they hit my class, and then they just melt down, and they're like, this is so much information. And I have to keep telling them, this is the basics. This is the beginning level class. This is you're just tip of the iceberg kind of here. This
Right.
is, you know, this is just the very beginning of this, you know. So it's much more comprehensive than most people really realize when you think about visual story. And quite honestly, that's why there's so few great visual storytellers, you know. The other thing is that it took me a long time to realize that this is not an auteur sport. You know, this is a team sport. And so you have to surround yourself with a good team, which means, you know, finding good actors and actresses, finding good crew people. You know this. I mean, and that's why people tend to work with the same people over and over and over again, because you develop a language and you develop a relationship, and it becomes like a family. And you know this. If you work with people long enough, I mean, you know, there are people that I've probably spent more time with in the last 30 years than I've spent with my wife, you know. And so you develop these relationships that, you know, are pretty deep. And so if you look at Clint Eastwood or Woody Allen or any of those guys, they worked with the same people over and over again, you know, and that's why. So you have to learn how to, you know, do that. But for me, I just think if you don't know how to tell a good visual story, if you want to be a good editor, you need to be a good camera person. If you want to be a good camera person, you need to be a good editor. If you want to be a good director and producer, you need to know how to shoot and edit. You just need to know that stuff, because if you don't, you don't know how to tell a good visual story. And that's what it's all about, you know. It's you know, a strong story, you know, that evokes emotion. If you can, you know, come away doing that, that's the ball game right there, you know. Doesn't
Awesome,
matter
man.
how, what emotion you evoke, as long as you evoke an emotion, that's what we're looking for.
Wow. Yeah. Love it, man. What an answer. Tell us now, of course, working with so many people, so many different people, of course, working on a lot of productions. Sometimes we know things don't always go as planned. Now, what would be a great way to handle things when they're not going as smooth as you would hope them to be going, you know, from your expertise?
I've done it both ways, the good way and the bad way. So again, my wife is a nurse. She started as an ER nurse, and, you know, a cardiac nurse for a long time, and a cancer nurse, you know, for a long time. And so I would come home and I would be bitching about what a bad day we had on the set. And, you know, the director was an idiot, and, you know, the producer was screaming at everybody. And it's like, and she'd just say to me, did anybody die on you today? And I would go, no. And she would say, okay, well, that kind of puts it in perspective, don't you think?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
so that's it. It's, you know, this is film and television. It's, you know, it's not, nobody's gonna die. Nobody, you know, it's not gonna,
Right.
you can change the world, hearts and minds. You know, I'm a true believer in that. And, you know, that's one of the things that you know, for me, the reason I do this is because you can change the world. But, you know, you have to, it's like, you know, in my bathroom every day, when I wake up, there's a sign in my bathroom that says it's a good day for a good day, you know. And so people say to me all the time, you're happy all the time. Why are you happy all the time? I choose to be happy all the time. And it's the same way if you're dealing with a problem on a set. You can deal with it a good way, or you can deal with it a bad way. I don't tolerate, raising voices on a set. I don't tolerate people yelling at people on a set. Even if I'm like a DP, and the director is yelling, I will pull the director aside and say, if you want me to stay on the set, do not yell at anybody else in front of me. You can pull somebody off the set and yell at them all you want, but do not yell at people in front of other people. That's just unprofessional. I won't tolerate it, and so that's it. And so you just have to treat people with kindness, and so people are going to make mistakes, that's fine, but you got to be able to give people breaks when that happens, and be understanding about it. And you'll find that if you do that, the next time you need something from that person, they're going to go, well, you treated me decently, that I screwed up and you treated me decently, and you could have been a real, dick about this, but you weren't. So, whatever you need, I'll do this. So it's, my grandmother used to say, you get a lot more with, honey than pepper. And it's true. So, and I've trust me, I've worked with some really caustic people that should not be ever be around other people. But there's also a lot of really good people, and I've seen people change, and it's when you get into the thick of things and things start going bad, that really tells a lot about your true character, how well you handle yourself when things go bad. It takes a lot for me to get really mad. It's usually stupidity that does it. Blatant stupidity. What did they say about? I'm not even going to get it. That I probably shouldn't say that about. Yeah, I was going to talk about Herschel Walker for a second, but it's you just have to be, realize that, look, nobody's going to die here. This is, so yeah, we may have to do that over again, and we may go an hour over, but nobody's going to die. It's, there's no reason at all to raise your voice at anybody. Everybody's trying their best. Everybody, they put themselves out. They're away from their families. They're out here working their butts off. Treat people with decency. That's what it's all about. It's, and I say this to my students all the time. Don't forget to have fun. If you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. It's that simple. It's not complicated. What we do is not complicated. People make it complicated.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So what advice can you give our listeners as they're getting ready to graduate and want to work in this industry, especially our students personally too? What advice can you give them to prepare themselves?
So you got to ask yourself this one question: what's going to differentiate you from everybody else? Just ask yourself that question. If you don't have an answer to that, that's a pretty good place to start, right? And so we start with our students, early on in the degree program. Like, my last week of my class, I have this whole thing with them where I sit down with them and I say, okay, you got 19 months left in school. Here's a 19-month success plan that you probably haven't even thought about. You, besides doing all the projects and assignments in your classes, you need to be producing 2 or 3 things on your own every month, and that's not when they go, oh man, yeah. So we understand, look, you got a job, you got a family, and you're going to school full time. And now I'm saying to you, hey, I want you to do 2 projects every month on your own. Plus, I'm like, you need to be developing at least 1 or 2 industry resources every month. And you need to be putting up 4 or 5 pieces of stock footage on a stock footage account somewhere every month. So that in 19 months, instead of just having the, 10 or 12 things that you're going to be shooting in this degree program, you're going to have 40 or 50 things that you're going to have on your portfolio and your demo reel on your website. You're going to have a whole list of, industry resources, and you're going to have, passive income. Might be not be a lot, but it may be, $100 every couple months. That's equipment money. And so again, my mentor, Ricardo Diaz, in college used to say to me, do something every day, no matter how small, to put you one step closer to your goals. He said, at the end of the year, you've done 365 things put yourself closer to your goals, kind of hard not to be successful if you do that. And so that's
Wow.
it. Read an article, talk to somebody, go out and shoot something. It's just a matter of having that kind of mindset of that you're going to constantly be moving forward and growing and doing things on your own. So I say to people all the time, when you think about a project, you may think, oh, I want to do a music video. Okay, well, you're not going to do 2 music videos in a month if you're going to school full time and you have a full-time job and you have a family.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to do a stanza of 1 music video, 7 or 8 shots, you could do that pretty easily. You can sit down. I say, make these projects. You can shoot in half a day, write in half a day, shoot in half a day, edit in half a day. If you do that, you can do 2 of those every month easily. If you want to do a short film, do 1 scene of the short film every month, 1 scene. That's how Sex Lives and Videotapes, they would shoot 2 or 3 scenes, run out of money, wait a month or 2, go back out and shoot, raise more money, go back out and shoot 2 or 3. So
Wow.
that's the way to do it. Or just shoot stock footage, or there's so many things that people can be doing right now. And so one of the cool things about our students is that you need to be doing a lot of that stuff while you're in school. Don't wait till you graduate, and a lot of our students are. As soon as they get their cameras, I can't tell you how many people call me up and say, hey, I just got this job, I just got my camera, I'm going to do a wedding, or I was out shooting for the assignment, and the shop owner saw me and said, hey, I need a video for my webpage, can you come and shoot that? So people are getting jobs. And so it's a matter of going out there and looking. Now, the other big thing to that is, the whole networking end of it. People, if you're freelancing, which a lot of our students are going to come out of school freelancing, they got their own camera and stuff like that. The problem with freelancing is that it takes you about 2 years to stop freaking out about, oh my God, where's my next job coming from? How I'm going to make rent next week. It takes you about 2 years before you realize, okay, if I'm good at this and I'm marketing myself, then those jobs are going to come. But when you're marketing, you're not working. When you're working, you're not marketing. So you got to figure out a way to do that. And for me, it was all about networking. I joined a bunch of professional organizations. I was on the board of Women in Film. I was on the board of the Orlando Ad Federation. I was on the board of the Florida Public Relations Association and Florida Motion Picture and Television Association and Film Florida. I got involved in all those. And I just didn't show up at the meetings and say, here's my resume or here's my business card. I figured out who the officers were in that organization. And every officer usually heads a committee. And then I figured out who I wanted to work with and who I wanted to get to know. Then I figured out what committee they were doing. Then I went to them and said, I'd like to volunteer for your committee. So a lot of those people never worked with me, but they constantly recommended me for jobs because they knew I worked my butt off on their committee. And they knew, every time they were around me, they were like, oh, what are you working on? Oh, you're doing this really cool project. So when somebody called them, they were like, do this. And it's the same thing. Like I said, I started working on this film in college. And so when I started doing that film, I still had 1 class left for a degree in secondary education. I had a degree in film and television, but I had 1 class left. And so about 15 years after that, Ball State called me and said, hey, are you ever going to finish up this degree? You've got 1 class left and it's a elective. So I knew that the local film office here was wanting to do a location library, and I knew the people there. They were my interns at another company, and so I called them up and said, hey, I'd like to be your intern. I'd like to come in and develop this location library for you. And so I'll work on my own for 3 months, and I'll go out and if you help me get into locations that I normally have problems getting into, like the airport or on top of buildings and stuff like that. And so they were really cool. They had a little card printed up that said, official photographer, the EDC and stuff. And so I shot for 3 months, I think I did 20,000 photos of Central Florida.
Wow.
So out of that, I wrote a book called How to Shoot in Central Florida. And so I called that down to about, 8 or 9,000 photos, I think. But when I was out shooting photos, I was shooting time lapse and motion control and video of all that stuff. And it's every major sign, every major building, every major, location or landmark or, all that stuff. And so when I gave him all the photos, I said, here's all the photos, have fun with them. But also I've got this really cool now, 20-minute reel on a DVD of all the stock
Right.
footage of Orlando. So if you have anybody coming into town looking for stock footage, send them my way. So for like 5 years, I made like $30,000 off that little
Wow.
20-minute reel of stock footage. So, and I got to be known as the guy. If you were looking for a location in Orlando, call Randy. He knows where all the cool locations are. And so
Wow.
it was just networking, women in film and television, and people used to say to me, you're a guy. Why are you involved in women in film and television? There's lots of guys in women in film and television. But if you live in a big city like Atlanta or Miami or New York or Chicago or Houston, if you go to the Women in Film and Television website and look at it, you'll find those are the movers and shakers in the industry.
Mm.
So do what I did, get to know who the people are you want to get to know, go and, instead of just joining the organization, volunteer for a committee. And every one of those has student membership, so they're not that expensive. So it's a matter of going out there and networking. And so I was proactive about it too. I took networking classes. I went to classes on how
Wow.
to network. And so, my wife will tell you, even if we go to parties now, she goes, he knows how to work a room, and so it became a game. One of the coolest things that somebody told me early on was, make it a game. See how many people
Yeah.
you can get to meet when you go to a professional meeting like that. Just see how many people you can meet in that night. And so it became this game for me. And so
Yeah.
I got to know tons of people. And back then, before the internet, I would collect business cards. So I developed a database of all the local crews before there was like Production Hub or, the EDC film site. So when people were looking for crews, they would call me. When they were looking for locations, they would call me. When they were looking for gear, they would call me.
Wow.
So yeah.
You're your own film commission,
Yeah,
basically.
it's when I first started out, here's a great story for you. When I first started out, when I moved to Orlando, I worked for these global video as a color. When I decided to go back out on my own as a freelancer, there were like 7 or 8 production companies by that point, and I would call them up and said, "Hey, you don't know me? My name is Randy Baker. I'm a producer, director, DP, and I've been researching your company. I think we worked good together. Would you have like an hour that you could spend with me that you could tell me about your company and see how we could work together?" They were all said, not really, we're too busy, we can't really do that. And I was like,
Mm.
okay. So a friend of mine said, had a magazine in DeLand called Florida Marquee, which was a regional production magazine, which there used to be a lot of those things around. And so he said, would you like to write a magazine article for me? And I was like, yeah, cool, that would be fun. And he goes, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do articles about local production companies,
Mm.
and so the same production company I called like 3 weeks earlier and said, can you spend an hour with me telling me about your company, would say no. But when I called them and said, hey, I'm writing an article about production companies in Central Florida and I'd like to interview you, would you be able to spend an hour with me? They would not only spend an hour, they would take me to lunch, they would show me all over the facility. And within the course of that conversation, it
Wow.
would always come up, well, what do you do? And are you just a full-time writer? No, I'm a producer, director, DP, and I've got all these credits, and these are my clients. And they're like, oh, we should work together. Not knowing that
Wow.
I called you 3 weeks ago and asked you. So it
Crazy.
opened up a lot of doors for me. And today with blogging, that's another way of doing it. It's just another way of
Mhm.
doing it. So there's
Yeah.
all these sideways doors you can go through. And then, just look at all the vertical markets out there. Just start
Right.
looking at all the different people who are hiring video people and figure out what you want to do. My philosophy is if you're coming out of school, work for somebody else first, learn on their dime. And then, have a plan in mind. I was always taught, have a 1-year plan, have a 5-year plan, have a 10-year plan. That's the thing. And so, do something every day to move you towards that, goal and that plan. It doesn't take long.
Nice, nice. So, Randy, you told us about a lot of great resources. Are there any other resources you want to drop off with us?
Oh, there's tons. I mean, I'm a resource kind of guy. And so I if you were to go to an airline, for example, and say to them what's their most valuable asset, it wouldn't be something tangible. It would be their ticketing system, their reservation system. That's where everything is. And it's the same thing for us. It's that resource. I mean, a lot of people still don't know about Mandy's or production hubs. Mandy's was the original production directory. It was part of what's the sister come Backstage. Mandy's and Backstage. You sign up for Mandy's and Backstage and put in what you do, like a DP or director or a writer, you will get 5 or 6 things a day from them saying, here's somebody looking for that type of job. And the same thing with Production Hub. Production Hub just happens to be here in Winter Park. Some old friends of mine, that I've known for 20 years since they started the company, and now they're the largest production database. So you need to get on that. You need to get to know your local film commission, and you need to get to know your state film commission, and you need to be on their databases. So if people people like me still, I go to Production Hub, and if I'm looking for somebody in Boston or somebody in Washington D.C., I go to Production Hub. It used to be I would call up the professional organizations that I belong to and say, hey, would you recommend anybody? That's what I used to do, but those are it. Shot Deck is still, like I said, still my favorite new one that I go to all the time. They do a Tuesday drop. They just did one Tuesday yesterday where they dropped, I think, something like 100 some new film titles.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool. I part of what I give out to my students is a database, DCBS resource thing. It's massive. It lists all the professional organizations like DGA and PGA and American Society of Cinematographers and Canadian and English and Australian, all that stuff. Plus, we've broken it down into my top 50 websites. And so if you don't know websites like Studio Binder and Premium Beat and Video Maker, I've subscribed to Video Maker for 35 years. And it's still, I'm amazed at what I learn out of that. No Film School, Filmmaker IQ, Film Riot. Mike Donnelly is a Full Sail graduate. And so if you develop a database of those types of they're called aggregate sites, where they just aggregate information and then publish it, and they do a lot of their own original stuff. DSLR filmmaker, and so all that stuff is on there. And then there's all these learning resources out there. A lot of people don't know about Kelby One. Kelby One is like the photographylynda.com. It's run by a guy named Scott Kelby out of Safety Harbor, which is Clearwater, Florida. It's this holy grail of photography. He hires like the top 200-300 photographers in the world who work for them doing educational lessons and videos and tutorials and stuff. Just amazing stuff. A lot of free stuff on there, but it's a subscription. He owns Photoshop World and Lightroom World, and he does all the national traveling conventions. He's got like 5 internet channels. He's the most prolific author for photography in the world. He's written more books than anybody else. So that's always a good one. Filmmaker IQ, John Hess, if you don't know that website, man, his stuff is brilliant. I'm a big video essayist. I like people like Koga Nada and Tony Zhao. Now, both of those guys have since left and now are producing for the streaming services. They're directing stuff for streaming services. They started out doing these video essays on the internet and got right away. They each did about 20 of them, I guess, before they were hired by these, Netflix and Hulu and those guys to produce original programming for them. So that was an interesting way that they went through the door. Yeah. There's all the learning sites, Moviola, Filmmakers Masterclass, which is who's the DP that was yelled at by Christian Bale on the Terminator. God, I'm blanking on his name. I'll think of it. Lovely Wife. Roger Deakins' blog. If you haven't paid attention to that blog, that's great. Or there's I'm gonna blank on the name of it. I'm horrible with the names. It's a aggregate site where they, when the pandemic hit, there were all these people that were out there do traveling, film and video shows, like Vince LaForêt, who was the father of the DSLR movement. He shot the very first DSLR movie on a 5D Mark I. And then there was who's the DP from Saturday Night Live. He did one, and so all these people were doing these traveling workshops, and so a company got them all together and said, hey, we'll market all your material for you, and so you can do that. A master class, I mean, I've been belong to master class since the beginning. I spend about $2,000 a year on educational sites, because I
Wow.
think it's really important to stay
Yeah.
current. Plus, I like to see how other people teach this stuff, so
Hmm.
for getting ideas. But there's so much information. I mean, if you make a list, if you happen to get a hold of that DCBS resource guide, and if you like, I'll send it to you so you can publish it.
I've been waiting on my version.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll send it to you right now.
I've been
It's
waiting.
massive. When people look at it, they're like,
Yeah.
holy, this is so much information. I also bookmark stuff all the time. I have
Hmm.
probably 30,000 bookmarks in my
Wow.
bookmarks, and they're all categorized. So if I'm looking for something specific, I know I can go back and so it's easy as if I read an article. And so I get up early in the morning, I walk my dog, I come into my office, I'm in here probably about 7:30 in the morning, and I, go through my email, and it takes me about an hour and a half to go through email, because I get all these, great, emails from all these, websites that are like, premium beat or production, that here's a great article, and it's not one article, there's 5 or 6 articles or videos or tutorials. And so I quickly go through those and find the ones that I like, open them up, bookmark them. If there was something I want to read, I make a note of it in my little
Hmm.
daily note thing, and then I go back and look at them. So I'm constantly learning, constantly seeing new stuff,
Yeah.
constantly, that's it. My only regret is that, I, I don't have enough time to go out and shoot on my own. I used to, before I was teaching and I was just freelancing, I learned how to, again, people freak out. So when you're freelancing and you finish up a job, you're like, okay, where's my next job coming from? So you may be 2 weeks before your next job. So people tend to freak out. It takes you a long
Hmm.
time to realize I need to take advantage of these 2 weeks. I need to get
Yeah.
some downtime in. I need to go out and shoot stuff on my own that I want to shoot and relax. And so my big problem right now is just finding time to go out and shoot stuff. I used to
Wow.
be a, you know, proficient bird photographer. I shot
Hmm.
thousands. I haven't gone out shooting birds in, probably over a year now. So
Wow.
it's those types of things that I really want to get back. The stock footage, I want to go start going back out and shooting stock footage. I shoot every day. I shoot time lapse every day. I've got a GoPro or a camera running in my backyard pretty much every day. I'm setting up shadows
Wow.
and doing anything that moves. I'm shooting ants in my backyard, or flowers opening and closing, or shadows on a fence. Every day I'm trying to shoot something. Even if I'm
Nice.
stuck in my office, I can run out and change the battery or do something. So but and again, I probably work 2 days a week in the industry, sometimes more. Next week I have a 4-day shoot coming up,
Oh.
and then I still do a lot of projects on my own. I'm at a point right now where working at Full Sail allows me to take on my pet projects that I like to do. So I'm a big believer in that you can change the world with video. So,
Mm.
if you are really want to, and you really put your mind at it, you can do some good with video. And so,
Nice.
I just finished up this documentary on homelessness and mental illness. I'm doing an ADA video right now on
Wow.
for people with mobility, beach access, this kind of the state of the art about beach access and all the different things that beaches are doing, and what the ADA is doing with beaches to allow people with mobility issues. And so I do a lot of pet projects that are for nonprofits, or people who just need video, that don't Give Kids the World, and there's another one in Tampa that I do work for. So and no, if they call me, I will say, yeah, sure, I'll do it. That's it,
Hmm.
because that's what it's all about, kind of trying to give back as much as possible. And if you really do the research, you'll find there are people out there that that's all they do, is they put their time and effort into doing things that are going to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So that's the power of videos to do that.
That's amazing. So Randy, how can listeners check out some of your work online? Is there a way that
Well,
we can?
I'm, so I'm at a point in my career where and people, it is, again, it's very cyclical. When I was really, out there just hustling, doing freelance work all the time, and I had again, it's a different approach. People say to me, are you a freelancer? I'm like, I have a production company. I freelance out of that production company, but I have a production company. I do all, I hire people out to edit and shoot and do things. And, I have a massive amount of equipment and, big production van. And, I have a office in my house that's just dedicated to business. And so I have a production company, but it's still, freelancing. And so I got to a point where people were like, can you send me a demo reel? Well, I was working so much that if I was going to, update my demo reel, it would be like a weekly thing, and I just got to the point where it's like, if you want to see my work, I don't believe in demo reels because anybody can edit together the best 2 or 3 seconds of, a half an hour program. And you go, wow, that looks really good, but the program may suck. So here's, where my shows are airing online. So you can
Gotcha.
go and look at that. So, yeah, I mean, if you
Yeah.
just, you want to see my work, it's everything from Extreme Home Makeover to Apprentice to Survivor to you name it. Hogan Knows Best, Swampman, Swamp Brothers, Swamp Thing, Swamp Wars,
Wow.
American Pickers, Picked Off, you just start going through all the different shows that you've done.
Yeah.
They just pick any of those and look at them. I spent 6 years doing Dr. K's Exotic Animal Yard, the #2 show on Nat Geo Wild. So it's just when you do that much work, you can't constantly be updating your thing. So I have a website, but I haven't updated it in a long, long time. People are like, I looked at your IMDb and it's like blew me away how much stuff you do. And I was like, I've never gone into IMDb and done anything. It just happens to be they just pick up things that I've worked on. And it's 5 or 6 times what you're seeing on there. So
Wow.
it's like I'm at a point right now where it's like I don't have a whole lot online that people can see. Again, if you look on IMDb and look at my shows, you can go to any show and look at it.
Yes.
Um, it's yeah, I have randybakerproductions.com is my website, so they can go there and see some of the shows. But like I said, I haven't updated that in a while. But it's just watch your television. You'll see my name all the time. It's like it's
Right.
funny. We'll be sitting around at night watching things. I go, oh, I shot that.
Like
The
what?
credits come up. The DP Randy Baker, and then the next show comes
Wow.
up. Hey, I worked on that show too. Or you'll see in between the shows, you'll see a commercial. I was like, hey, I shot that commercial.
Wow.
So it's pretty crazy.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Randy, for this wonderful interview, man. This is going down as a fave in my book. Are there any final thoughts you want to leave for our listeners?
Have fun. This is really lean into this. If this is what you want to do, we interviewed a guy who was a Hall of Famer named Demo, who was a record producer out of the record factory in Miami. And little known guy, produced for a couple, up and coming artists like Timberlake and Timberland and Madonna, and that's the type of level he was at. And I was doing an interview with him for the Hall of Fame. And I said to him, he said to me, I just want everybody around me to have a jobby. And I was like, we got done with the interview, and I was like, what's a jobby? I've never heard of that before. And he goes, it's a job that's a hobby. It's a job that you would still be doing even if they didn't pay you to do it. And I was like,
Right.
that's what I want everybody to have.
Yeah.
I see so many people, there's the old saying, it's debatable who said it. It goes all the way back to Aristotle, but it was actually in the 1940s. It was the first time they recorded it. It's like, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's where I'm at. I've been doing my entire, people say, how long you've been working in the industry? I'm like, well, work is kind of a, it's, if you want to call it work, you can call it work. But, for me, it's just like I had so much fun doing it. And my wife, I had to learn how, she's a nurse who worked around people who were sick all the time. And so I'd come home from these fantastic shoots and go, oh, I got to do this, and I got to meet this person, and we ate this incredible food. And it's like, she was like, yeah, I went to work every day. It's like, for her, it's a job. For me, it was like venture. And so, over time, I got to realize I'd come home and she'd say, what do you do? Oh, we just shot stuff, not a whole lot of anything. Is I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
keep my mouth shut.
Keep your mouth shut.
So yeah,
Wow,
but
man.
lean into this. If you want to do this for a living, sit down and make a list, make a make a
Mhm.
1-year plan, make a 5-year plan, kind of figure out what you're doing. For a lot of people, that's the hard thing, is kind of figuring out what they want to do. And so that's just a matter of sitting down and doing a little bit of research. And the thing that really changed the way I looked at things was my high school teacher. Going back all the way to my high school teacher, he
Yeah.
said to me, "Don't dream little, dream big." And I said,
Mhm.
"What do you mean?" He goes, I know back then I wanted to be an animator. The only problem was
Mhm.
I couldn't draw. I had 2 college
Mhm.
roommates who were graphic artists, and they were like, "We can teach you to draw. That's not hard at all. We'll teach you how to draw." 3 months in, they were like, "You might want to look at another career instead of an
Right.
animator." But growing up, I did animated films, mostly like stop motion and stuff. But he said to me, don't go and work for a local production company, animation company in Indianapolis. Go to Disney, go to Hanna-Barbera, go to the big companies. Find out what animator really inspires you. Call them up and say, "I want to come work for you." So dream big. So too many people kind of look at that now. Of course, a lot of our students, our students are a little bit older than most, and so they have families, and they're tied in and stuff, so they can't move to LA or move to Atlanta. I say to people all the time, if I was young, they'd go like, "Where would you go?" I'd go to Atlanta. That you would not be stopping me from moving to Atlanta right now. You got Trilith, there's 6 big studios up there. Tyler
Mhm.
Perry studio, Trilith, which was Pinewood, one of the largest studios in the United States. I mean, you look at the big movies and TV
Right.
shows that are being shot, it's at Trilith, which is, a half hour outside of Atlanta, out in the middle of nowhere. And they're building an entire town based around these studios, you know.
Wow.
So it's and it's affordable. You still can, you're out in the middle of nowhere, so you can afford the homes and stuff. It's not like LA or New York where you can't afford to live. Even if you go out there and work in the industry, you're living with 4 or 5 other people because you can't afford a house.
Mhm.
And so it's the new frontier there. And unfortunately, it should have been Orlando,
Right.
doing that. But because we have
Right.
Kayada politicians in the state that don't understand, the power of film incentive and
Mhm.
the film programs, having a good film program. Um, uh, Most people don't realize this. 10 years ago, Atlanta and Orlando had the same production budget for filming every year. We were both somewhere around 45-50 million dollars. Last year I think Atlanta did what, 8 billion, something like that. 8
Wow.
billion.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Crazy.
CNN
Crazy.
did a great documentary about it, by the way, that is
Mhm.
I just saw recently. But yeah, it's like, go out there and make a plan. Again, going back to my mentor, he used to say to me all the time, make a plan, shoot your plan. Make a plan and
Gotcha.
shoot your plan. That's
That's
what
right.
you got to do. So just have a plan. Most people don't have a plan.
Mhm.
It doesn't take you long. Sit down 15 minutes and write out your goals and what you want to do and who you want to work for, and then go after that dream. Don't be
Yes.
afraid to go after that dream. It's you'll be surprised at how easy it is to reach that dream if you're really dedicated, and you love what you do, and you're knowledgeable, and uh, yeah, it was like when I was doing the thing on how to sell TV shows. I kept hearing the same thing over and over again. If you know how to produce, if you can come to us and prove that you can produce a television show that's quality and it's on time and on budget, you will never have to pitch us a show again, because we have so many
Mhm.
shows we want to do. We don't have enough good production companies to be able to do that we trust. And so they
Mhm.
used to say to me, it's like building an apartment complex. If you went to a bank and said, "Hey, I want to build an apartment complex. I want you to loan me $45 million." And they would say to you, "Have you ever built a apartment building before?" And you would say, "No." They're probably going to go, "We're not going to loan you the 45 million." It's the same thing with
Right.
doing television shows or film. If you go to a studio or a network and say, "Hey, can you give me $5 million to do this television show?" And they go, "Well, have you ever done a television show before?" And you say no, they're not going to give you that money. They're not even going to talk to you, but uh,
Mhm.
that's it. So it's just a matter of going out there and having a plan and going after your goals.
Love it, man. Love it. Love it. My final thought for you, Randy, is, man, You are truly an amazing individual in my life. Whenever you talk, you're someone that I just have to stop and just listen. So this was perfect for the podcast show,
Well, you
right?
see, I feel the same way about you. I talk about
Really?
you all the time in my class. I'm like,
What?
if you want to pattern yourself off of somebody, look at
Oh man.
Ronald. Pattern yourself off to Ronald. This is the guy who's got 3 kids and a wife, and he's prolific at producing films, and he's doing a
Oh
podcast.
man.
Uh, that says a lot about who you are, and you're a Christian guy, and you have strong
Oh,
family values, and you're, ethical, and that people should be looking at you and going, I want to be just like this guy.
oh man, you about to don't make me start crying on live here. Oh, man, appreciate it, man. It was truly an honor to have you. I'm looking forward to the day we get to work on some productions together.
Oh yeah.
So we got to definitely get that into work soon. But man, thank you so much, man, for being here, for blessing the show. It's been truly a blessing, brother. And I
My
appreciate you.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.